All right. Hello and welcome to episode number 35 of the Maximizing E-commerce podcast. My name is Kevin, your host, and I'm so glad that you are here. So, what we're going to talk about today is how to sell on Amazon's international marketplaces. I'm going to walk you through why I think it's one of the best opportunities for growing your e-commerce business, as well as walking you through the steps. Now, I'm going to be a little bit of a call it a fire hose. I'm going to be a fire hose. The information I'm going to provide for you is going to feel a little bit like drinking from the fire hose. So, just to give you a heads up, I'm going to go more in depth on these steps in a training, which, depending on when you're listening or watching this, will be either in the future or already will have happened and you can get a replay. But either way, you can go to expandinternationally.com or maximizingecommerce.com/expand. Either way, you will get to the page where you can sign up to get more updates on when the training is available, free training, and it'll walk you through the steps. And then also you can go to maximizingecommerce.com/35 and get the notes for this particular episode. All right. And then as well as if you're watching this on YouTube, the notes will be in the description down below. All right. So let's talk a little bit about why selling on Amazon's international marketplaces like Canada, Germany, UK, Japan, wherever, why that is uh, a good opportunity. Now, for me, it's become about a six-figure a year revenue stream. And the nice thing is, this is basically sales I'm getting that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise by just simply taking my listings, copying them over onto the other marketplaces and sending in some inventory. So it's a lot less risky than, new products and things of that nature. And we'll go into, a little bit more about comparing this to other sources of growth. But I've found truly for me, it really is a good opportunity. So when you think about, growing your business, there's three ways you can primarily do that. I think it's Jay Abraham came up with this. And it's basically new customers, new products, or selling more to your existing customers. So, to sell more to your existing customers, you really need your own email list, which is a good thing to build. When you have your own store and things of that nature, and do social media and things of that nature. But that takes time to build up to having a list and a fan base of people who would buy from you again. Or if you have your product on Amazon, depending on your product and the nature of it, if it's a spatula and they buy one spatula every 5 years, they're probably not going to reorder it anytime soon. But if you sell something that's somewhat reorderable, then people will be reordering it. And you don't really get a lot of control in the repeat business on Amazon. And if it's off Amazon and you're building a list, that can take some time. Now, that's a great thing to work on. Now, also, let's talk about new products. So with new products, there is a risk. It is a good thing. I truly believe you should be putting new products into the pipeline. I look back at 2019 and I wasn't as aggressive at putting new products in the pipeline. And I think that kind of shot me in the foot, especially in the US. And it's definitely something you should be doing. And the thing of it is, you don't know, and you're putting capital out there to purchase a product, and it may work, it may not work, or it may work but not as well as you'd hoped it would be, and you may have a handful of extra units sitting around. So there is always that that fear when you're using new products as your growth strategy, because at a certain point, cash flow becomes more and more of an issue. All right. So then the other way is to get new customers. So let's say you want to get new customers and you're selling on Amazon.com. So oftentimes people think in terms of other .coms in the US. So let's say other marketplaces like eBay, Etsy, Walmart. Those are all great. If you can do those and you can get approved for those and your product makes sense in those marketplaces, sure, do it. Now, with those, what I've come to learn is you end up in a situation where you're having to learn a new algorithm. Things don't quite work the same. Your listings aren't going to be the same format. You can use a lot of the same information, but just like where you go to put stuff in, how to get the algorithm to favor your product is different than how it would be on Amazon. So if you're things are going for you on Amazon, you're going to have a learning curve on the other marketplaces, which I think is something in your strategy long term you should consider, is going into other marketplaces. And then also having your own Shopify store, or it doesn't have to be Shopify. I use Shopify, but let's say it's BigCommerce, WooCommerce, or whatever other shopping cart platform you want to use. I think those are all great things you should do and build your own store. Now, the challenge you run into is um, people don't just find it. It's not like, remember the movie Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. It's generally speaking, with websites, you don't just build them and they come. So Amazon has put in years and years and all kinds of work and marketing to be a channel where people come. Your store, you might get some SEO traffic here and there. You can run ads, but that's learning a whole new skill set. And ads are generally more expensive off Amazon than they are on Amazon. So if you're getting 15% ACoS, 20% ACoS on your product or whatever it is, chances are it's going to be much higher off Amazon. So just something to consider. And then also the thing to keep in mind is, you're now having to work on design and development. Now, yeah, there's templates and skins isn't the word, but it's there's design templates you can use. I forget the exact word I'm looking for here, but basically you can get designs, and some of them are optimized for e-commerce. Especially when it's Shopify and things like that. I'm sure BigCommerce is similar to that. But point being, there's a lot more skill sets you have to do to get people to to your store and get them to buy once they're on your store. And oftentimes industry experts say 3% is a good is a good number of conversions. Whereas, on Amazon, 10, 15, 20% would be a healthy conversion on Amazon. So it's a little different when, think about yourself. If you're on a website and you don't necessarily know that website, you might not know exactly okay, do I put in my number? Do I trust this place? Even if they have reviews and everything seems legit, but how do I know? There's all these trust indicators on there. You still don't always know. So, people like to go with what they know, and more people are buying on Amazon. And that's what makes selling on Amazon, especially here in the US, so good. Now, we'll get into a little bit more about how to sell internationally on Amazon, but think about this. People on Amazon.ca, which is the Canadian Amazon, for example, they can order a product just like here in the US. It's in their home currency, which would be Canadian dollars. They get it prime delivery, within a couple days, and it's a good experience, and they're getting used to it. And so I've come to find, like in Canada, about 13% of my sales in the US I've found in Canada. So oftentimes it's trending even higher lately. And generally people tend to find about 10%. Now there's no guarantees and whatnot. We'll go into some strategies here in a moment on how you can kind of mitigate some of the risk when going internationally. But, for me, selling internationally total between Europe and the other marketplaces in Canada, it's about an extra 30+% on top of what I'm selling in the US. Think about all the things you would do to get another 10, 20, 30%. And I would argue selling internationally is one of the least risky. And I'm not alone in selling internationally. I know lots of people that sell internationally, both people that I've helped and just people that I've talked to in general that are selling internationally. And they tend to find it really is a great channel. And if you're not selling internationally, before you start looking into other off Amazon channels, maybe selling internationally would be one you want to really look into. Now, what prevents people from selling internationally? So one is not understanding what to do. So again, we are walking through that here today, as well as, you can sign up for that training class, like I mentioned, maximizingecommerce.com/expand or expandinternationally.com. And you'll be on the priority list if it hasn't come out yet, to be one of the first to find out when that training comes available, or you can watch the training when it is live, depending on when you're listening or watching this. And then also, The thing to keep in mind is, there are hoops you have to jump through to sell internationally, but, we're talking about like filling out a few forms. Like, it's not that much difficult, and adding your listings on a marketplace, you already understand how it works, because when you're selling internationally, it's a drop down in Seller Central to switch between marketplaces, and mechanically it's pretty much all the same. Like, how things work, if you understand how things work on Amazon in the US, they work pretty similar in other marketplaces. Not everything exists in every marketplace. Like, as I'm recording this, there's no inventory performance index score in Canada, for example. There is one in Europe, and they got that after the US did, like about a year or so after. So not everything is exactly the same, and I would argue things tend to be simpler internationally. So if you do the things others won't do, you will get the results others can't have, and that's because you're willing to jump through those hoops. And what I think, besides not knowing what to do, I think two of the mental hangups people have are what I like to say are the government stuff and the money stuff. So the money stuff, I'll solve that here pretty easily. So foreign currency, and we're going to talk about some strategies on how to maximize foreign currency, but basically it's sixth grade level math. And you may be saying, well, how'd you come up with sixth grade level math? So my sister is a principal at an elementary school in Texas. And I asked her, if, let's say, $1 in the US is $1.3 Canadian, so therefore $20 US is how many dollars Canadian, what grade level would figure that out? And she said, oh, well, that's basic ratios. That's sixth grade level math. So if you've completed sixth grade, or whatever the equivalent of sixth grade is in your wherever you grew up, you can handle the money. So we'll talk about strategies again to maximizing the money. But it's literally just sixth grade math. It's just ratios, because remember, it's currency. It's just differences in currencies, which is just math to figure it out. Then it's the government stuff. And this is where stuff, I think, people are like, oh my gosh, like, am I going to get indicted and federal charges and all this stuff? Generally, no. Like, if you like, I'm not a lawyer here. I'm not a tax professional. So take what I'm saying here with a grain of salt. As someone, it's just my own personal experience, from my own business, because I've lived through it, as well as, having helped others as well. What it comes down to is you generally have to register in some country, which, once you find out what you got to do, it's not as hard as it may seem, and especially in English speaking countries. Um, like the US is an English speaking country. So is Canada. So is the UK. So is Australia. And in English speaking countries, they all tend to be English speaking because they're used to be former English colonies, and the laws tend to work the same. It's all based on, we'll call, English common law. So just the way the government works tends to, not exact, and I'm sure people find lots of examples of how they're different, but at least how things flow tends to be pretty similar. And the things you're not sure about, just pick up the phone and call. Like Canadian Revenue Agency, for example, who handles the registrations for Canada, you could call and they might ask you questions. They ask you this question: are you FBM or FBA? So are you fulfilled by merchant or fulfilled by Amazon? And they know what that means, and they're using the lingo because they're used to this. And, if you're talking to someone and they don't know FBA versus FBM, but if you just describe what it is you're doing, you're sending stuff into a warehouse in Amazon and you're selling to customers in that country, they're going to get it. And like, because they do this for a living. If you call the government, and they're there to help you. So as long as you're not like trying to get cocaine across the border, generally speaking, they want to help you. And, just look and see, like, as long as similar products to yours are selling, which we'll get into in a moment. And then you can always look and see if there's, regulatory things you have to be concerned about. Generally speaking, most private label type products you can sell in another country. You might have to jump through a couple more hoops or whatever, but when we're talking about extra revenue you wouldn't have gotten otherwise, because you're just casting a wider net essentially. But if you do the things others won't do, you can have the results others can't have. So, we're talking about some sort of registration, and then the taxes part. This is all under the government umbrella. This is the part I think people have the most anxiety about. So let me just put it this way. There's two types of taxes. There's sales tax and income tax. So just about every country has some sort of sales tax. So here in the US, it's sales tax, and it's based on where the person lives, and it's depending on the state and depending on the county they live in, maybe the city they live in. I mean, there's so many jurisdictions for tax, and it's very confusing. And the challenge is you can talk to 10 different sales tax experts about your own situation and get 20 different answers, I've found. So it's like one of those things, it's extremely gray here in the US. Abroad, I found it to be actually simpler. It's more black and white. You're generally filing with the federal government or whatever the main government entity is for that country, and maybe once a year, maybe quarterly, and it's more black and white. Um, and the nice thing is there's tax professionals who can help you with all this. And then the other part is, let's say, the income tax. At the end of the day, you're going to have to pay income tax on the profits you make. That's just, it just happens when you're in business. So your sales tax professionals that you're dealing with for your, or sorry, your income tax professionals that you're dealing with for your income tax, they're used to this. So if you're in the US, you're going to have to pay Uncle Sam. That's generally the way it works with most treaties, with most countries. As long as you're paying the income tax somewhere, it all works out. So let's say you go to your local CPA and you say, hey, here's this report, whatever. Now, Amazon will generally give you a 1099 if you have more than $20,000 in sales and 200 transactions. I think that's the thresholds. But even if you didn't quite meet that number, you can give them sales reports, even if they're in like British pounds. Like your accountant, I'm assuming, has, especially if they're a certified public accountant or chartered accountant or whatever it is where you live, I'm assuming they've finished sixth grade and they can handle basic ratios. So they do this for a living. Like my accountant, he has absolutely no problem with the foreign currency part. And like, I don't know that like he has a lot of clients that have sales outside of the country that deal with foreign currency, but like he has no problem figuring it out. It's like that's what they do. Like they understand this kind of stuff, so they can guide you. So it's not that complex. And if you don't have an accountant, it's time to be a big boy or girl business owner and get an accountant. All right. So hopefully that at least helped with some of the anxiety about selling internationally. So, all right. So now let's get into what are the steps you got to do. So first off, you want to decide what marketplaces you want to sell in. So I would recommend if you are in the US and you're English speaking, go to Canada. It's just simplest. The logistics are simple up there. Europe, it's a little more complex. The sales tax doesn't work quite the same because it's included in the price, and that just creates another layer of complexity. And that's a lot more complicated. Don't let it keep you from going into Europe, but I would say start in Canada. Now, if you speak, let's say Italian, I was talking to somebody the other day who speaks Italian, maybe it would make sense for you to go into another marketplace like Italy and go in earlier because you already understand the language, you understand the culture, maybe you're from there, whatever the case is. So it might make more sense for you to go there than someone else who maybe wants to go to Canada and then another English speaking marketplace like UK and then maybe the rest of Europe. So it just depends on, your situation. But I would recommend for most people start in Canada. Then you want to validate that customers are purchasing products like yours in those marketplaces, in that marketplace. So you can go on like amazon.ca. You can go like look up, like if you sell garlic presses, look up garlic press and then just look and see, like use Jungle Scout, like, or whatever app you use for product research and just look at the numbers. Are they making sales? Don't get too hung up on the numbers is my personal opinion, because we tend to look at through the lens of how we've been looking at the numbers. Because keep in mind, if you're getting 10% of the sales ish, you might get 10% of the sales in that country. And one thing I've also found is when you're looking at the numbers, oftentimes sellers don't put as many products into another marketplace, and that could also skew some of the numbers because oftentimes parent children products are kind of lumped together in one BSR, one bestseller ranking. So sometimes if there's like 40 variations of a product and it's ranking really high and it makes the numbers look really high because there's 40 of them, whereas they might only have for the same product like 10. And so that's something to keep in mind. And you might be, And so that's going to make their sales look lower than 10% if you compare the same listing and parent-children variation in the US. And what's to keep in mind is, like, let's say you have 5-10 products and you're looking at them, and in Canada, let's say they're selling 1 or 2 units a day. And you might be thinking, well, it's not worth it to get 1 or 2 sales a day. But think of it, the portfolio of your products. So if you're selling 5-10 products and they're selling 1 or 2 units a day in Canada, similar ones are, then that's 5, 10, 20 units a day you could potentially be looking at if you just add them into Canada and just offer it for sale. Like, it's actually a pretty good gig when you think about like what you could be doing to get another 5-10 units of sales per day. When you start comparing it to, like, the other marketplaces we talked about, chances are you're going to do better in the international marketplace. It's definitely been that way for me, and it has been for a lot of the people I've talked to. So, try not to look at it too much of like exact numbers. Really, what you're really validating is, if your product is selling in the US and similar products are selling in another marketplace, it's at least worth trying. That's my take. And then you can always get data and figure it out there, because you learn the most about how to swim when you actually jump in the pool. That's my little metaphor here. All right, so then you want to register with the applicable government. So with Canada, it's called Canadian Revenue Agency. Again, it's just a form you fill out. It's called the RC1 form, and you send it into the office for where you live, and you can find out all that online. It's usually, if you look up non-resident inquiries for Canada or for Canadian Revenue Agency. And then, in Europe, you will fill out basically a VAT account with HMRC, and that's Her Majesty's something in customs. I forgot the R. But anyway, it's like their version of the IRS. The CRA and HMRC are like their version of the IRS. And again, if you have questions, you can call them. And Canada, at least for me here in the US, my phone's free to call to Canada. It doesn't cost me anything more than my regular phone bill. And then Skype, you can get a Skype account, and it's dirt cheap. It's like pennies per minute to call the UK. And I would recommend, if you're going to do anything international, get an account with Skype or whoever. It's very inexpensive. So that way, if you have questions, you can call. So then what you want to do is, once you've got the registrations, typically for whatever their sales tax is, and you usually need something for importing. So for importing, it's like non-resident importer in Canada, and EORI for Europe. Now you want to add your listings to the new marketplace. You can either do those individually, or you can do a bulk upload file. And generally speaking, your ASIN or your UPC code for the US, you can add that into the other country. So, and it'll pull over a lot of the information. Oftentimes you still have to add like the title and the bullets and the description, the backend keywords. Sometimes that will already be there. And if it is there, I would highly recommend just quality checking it, because sometimes people have already added your listings. And if you see them there, don't worry about it. They're usually at like 2-3 times the price of what you're going to sell it for. And you're going to get the buy box because you'll have FBA inventory. They're usually FBM inventory. And if worst case scenario, somebody buys from that listing, they're just going to probably drop ship it from buying it from your US sales. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Generally speaking, you're pretty much always going to get the buy box over those people. So I don't even try kicking those people off my listings. The only thing to keep in mind with that is, when you're adding those listings, you may just have to quality control, maybe put in a seller support ticket. Hey, I'm brand registered, or I'm the brand owner, or the manufacturer, whatever the case is, you need to do to get them to give you attribution for the listing, so that your title, your bullet points, your description show up. And then generally speaking, I've found in almost every single case, the images will come over, and that makes it pretty simple. All right, so now you've got your listings up, and it's really just adding them into just the drop down, switching over to Canada or UK or whatever marketplace you're going into, adding those listings for that new marketplace, using the UPC code and the ASIN, just like how you'd normally add a product, and then it usually just matches it up. So now you want to send an inventory. And this is something I think trips people up too, is oftentimes people think like, oh my gosh, my minimum order quantity is 1,000. I don't want to have to order 1,000 units just for Canada if I'm only going to sell, you know, much smaller numbers. Well, you don't have to. You could just take your inventory and let's say you're ordering 1,000 units. Well, rather than sending it all to the US, or maybe you still send it all to the US, but maybe you have, 50 or 100 units sent up to Canada to test it out. And then once you have more data of how it sells, you could tell your suppliers, okay, here's how I want to do it. I want to send X number of units to the US, X number to Canada, or whatever the case is, or to Europe, and you can divide it up. So that way you're not actually ordering more. You're just ordering the same amount. And some people will say, well, but then if I'm selling through faster, I'm going to have to order inventory more often. Well, yeah, but if you're selling it through faster, it means you're making more sales. And if you're making more sales, it means you're getting the money back to you faster. So cash flow is coming in your favor. And the more you can turn over your inventory, the better it is for your business. And that's one of the things I like about international selling is it helps you turn over faster. All right. So then you've sent in your inventory, and one just little caution on inventory sending. You do have to find another company to help you, or you're basically, I say, on your own. Sending in the inventory. One of the nice things is if you're sending stuff within the US, Amazon gives you like the best rates you'll ever see. Unfortunately, they don't want to get involved in getting across the border. Not to worry, I've got a couple little tips you can do. One, you can get a quote from your freight forwarders or your factories to see what it would cost to do that. If you're sending it from the US into Canada, let's say, you could create a shipment in UPS. So if you have a UPS account, this will work for you. If you don't, you can create one. And if you don't have discounts on your account, see what discounts it gives you for, it's generally called UPS standard shipping, which is like the international version of ground. And here's what you could do. You could put in the promo code, and as of recently, when I most recently tried this, it worked. Promo code EASY, EASY, and promo code FAST. I even find, even with the discounts I have on my UPS account, it tends to be less expensive, like up to 40% off the shipping part, which is awesome. And then, all right, so then now you're shipping stuff in there. All right, so now you're going to have foreign money. So it's 6th grade level math. Just remember that. But what you want to do is use the 6th grade level math in your favor as much as possible. So the less you have to do 6th grade level math, the more money stays in your pocket. And I'll explain that here. Because what's going to happen is, let's say you look up on xe.com, which is a exchange rate website, or you look up on what's the word I'm looking for, on Google, just US dollar to Canadian dollar. What's the exchange rate? Whatever exchange rate you see online, generally speaking, is what's called the mid-market rate, and that's what banks charge each other. You're always going to lose something in an exchange, and it's generally not like itemized, like it's a fee they're charging you. It's just the exchange rate's not as favorable. And what happens is, let's say you have Amazon send money, like let's say we'll just use Canadian dollars because I keep using Canada, but this works, with euros and pounds or whatever. If they can't send euros, pounds, Canadian dollars, yen, whatever into your US bank account, what happens is they have to convert it to US dollars. So for the convenience of doing it, and I've never seen documentation from Amazon, but every company, which I'll explain here in a minute, that does this type of service I'm about to describe, they all say it's 3 to 4%. And I'll trust them because they have the exchange rates and they know what they are at all times. So they have data to validate that. So it's about 3 to 4%. So you're going to lose when you have Amazon just put things directly into your US bank account. Now, what's going to happen is, let's say you use a company like Payoneer or Ping Pong Payments, and they create an account for you that Amazon can take your Canadian dollars, your yen, your pounds, your whatever, and put it into that account. And then when you decide you want to move it into your US bank account, you'll lose 2%. So you're still losing something, but it's 1 to 2% over time of your disbursements. That adds up. That's pure profit for you in your pocket. All right. So another thing you want to do is to pay as much as you can in the local currency. So for example, a lot of us like to use um, our credit cards to pay for PPC because we get some sort of reward points, whatever the case is. Now, what ends up happening is you're going to, let's say, pay Amazon Canadian dollars, but from your US or wherever you live credit card. So there's a conversion there. And so the conversion is probably not going to be as favorable. And you might even be charged international fees. Some credit cards don't charge international fees, like Capital One Spark card doesn't charge international fees. There's other, I think American Express has cards that don't charge it. But either way, you might be charged international fees, and you might also be charged this like not as favorable exchange rate. So you're losing there. And then when you're getting the money back to pay off that credit card, from that marketplace, you're losing when you repatriate those whatever currency, Canadian dollars or whatever, into US dollars. So you're losing twice. Whereas if you have Amazon just take it out of your disbursement, you don't lose anything because it's all line itemed within the same currency. Hopefully that makes sense. So you don't lose anything in there. So definitely I recommend when you do PPC in another country, which is something you should be doing to get your sales going, you can not lose anything in the exchange rate. And anything else you can pay in the local currency, like Payoneer, for example, they have where you can have basically if someone has another Payoneer account, you can pay them in whatever currency. So like if you have a prep center that you're working with in Europe, you can just pay them. Or, I have an accountant of Ask that I use. I pay them through my Payoneer account. So I'm paying them because they want British pounds. So I just pay them in British pounds as opposed to, using my credit card. So where I'd be losing in two sides of that transaction, just pay them in pounds. I'm done. And then also when I pay VAT, you can pay VAT in Europe with Payoneer. And I'm not sure if ping pong payments is similar, but at least Payoneer, from my own experience, I just pay them the HMRC, the VAT out of my Payoneer account. So I'm not losing anything in that transaction. So hopefully that makes sense. So it's basically, it's not costing me money to move money within the same currency. So it's not losing that 2%. So it's making whatever I would lose that 2% smaller. So that's basically the way I would recommend doing it when you're working with currency. And if you want to get real creative and you have a holding account like Payoneer or whatever, you can maybe wait and see what is the currency going to do. I don't get into that type of stuff, but at least that's an option if that's your thing. I like to keep it simple and just, all right, when I'm ready to transfer it over, just transfer it over. And the nice thing is most countries, the countries that Amazon's in, the currencies are relatively stable. Like, in the Western world, we're all kind of together. And if, one currency might be slightly better than another, but it generally doesn't fall all that much. And even when the currency people talk about oh yeah, big swings, it might be 10% or whatever that it might change. And when you think about that, it's still all within the same currency, like most of what you're paying for. So your FBA fees, your commission, your PPC, your storage, whatever, you're paying for that. So it's really what's in your disbursements. And if you need to adjust, 6th grade level math will tell you maybe you need to raise the price or whatever the case is. But I've come to find it's not that impactful to my business where it's going to shut my business down, where it's you hear about Venezuelan currency went up 1,000,000% or whatever the case was. You hear horror stories of stuff like that. But generally speaking, where Amazon is countries with pretty stable currencies. And if their currency is fluctuating a lot, probably the US dollar is fluctuating a lot too, because we all kind of I'm not a currency expert, but it tends to all work together. All right. So then now you have this international business and you're saying to yourself, okay, what do I need to do to manage my new business? All right. So what you're going to do is you're going to, run PPC. And the nice thing is with PPC, if you're getting 10% of the sales, you probably only have 10% of the data. So you don't need to optimize it as often, especially once you get up and running. And generally speaking, there's less competition. So there's not as huge of swings. Like all of a sudden somebody comes in and they're, just trying to buy the market or whatever. I've come to find that's not typically the case with PPC. And once you get some data and you get more comfortable with it, oftentimes you can just let it run and just check on it every so often, just to see like how much you need to optimize. You need to make a few negative keywords or change some bids here or there, but it's not as much optimization and tweaking as you have to do in the US, because things aren't as in flux as much, and there's not as much data to look at to see if you even really need to make a change, um, which is a good thing. And then it's time to start just saying, okay, now do I want to expand into more international marketplaces? And as you expand into more international marketplaces and you get more comfortable, I think Canada is a good starter country. Then you go into Europe, the taxes are the VAT, which is essentially just a sales tax. It's just included in the price. Kind of like if you went to a ball game and somebody selling you a beer and they said it's $10. It's like the person walking up and down the steps and they say it's $10 and you buy it for $10 and you give them 20 and they give you $10 back. It's because the sales tax is already included. Whereas in the US, we're so used to everything adding on the sales tax, but in other countries, or at least in Europe, it's all included. Canada, it's added on like it is here. So in Europe, it's a little bit more complex because you have to figure out like your margins because it's built in there. So that's why I think it's step 2 to go there, because at least you've gotten your feet wet with selling internationally and you're a little more comfortable with it once you've done Canada. And then once you've done the UK, then you can start maybe translating your listings and going into Germany and maybe Italy, maybe Spain, maybe France. Spain and France are very slow. Italy could be hit or miss for people. Italy's actually been pretty decent for me lately. It's been relatively similar to Germany. That's not the case for everybody. And then you just really just keep going at it and casting a wider net. So hopefully you found this to be helpful. And if you'd like more training on this, you can go to, as I said earlier, maximizingecommerce.com/expand or expandinternationally.com. And we'll walk you through more step-by-step, a little more visually, where I've been more just kind of describing it here. And depending on when you're listening to this, you can either get on the priority list to be amongst the first to find out when this training is available, or you can watch the training if you're watching this or listening to this in the future. So thank you so much for sticking around, and I hope you found this to be helpful. And feel free to let me know if you have any questions. You can email me, Kevin@maximizingecommerce.com, and I'm going to wish you the best in your e-commerce journey. Take care.